Here with Erin Loechner. Erin, thanks for joining today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
Well, you're a busy person. I've been looking forward to chatting with you for a while. So I heard about you from Jonathan Haidt's resources on the anxious generation because you're one of these countercultural influencers who has programs and initiatives to get people off technology and into the real world. Now, you do also a number of other things. Can you just give us a little bit of a summary of the many initiatives that you do?
Yeah, of course. Actually, I'm a writer at heart. Writer is that's my trade. That's what I do. And so a lot of my work really stems from whatever passion I'm writing about at the time. And so this book was a bit of an accident. I was very interested in how do we give kids what technology can't. I was a former influencer. I had 1 million followers. I walked away from the industry of influencing, from social media. I do not have a social media account anymore because I saw some of where this direction was headed. Uh, what are we valuing as a society, and what are we replacing some of those values with when we embrace technology and social media in terms of the way in which we talk to each other and about each other. And so that is why I wrote The Opt-Out Family. So that's my most recent book. But a lot of what I do is I write books for other people. I edit books. I love everything about the written word, and that's a lot of what I do.
Okay. So a big part of this that I'm interested in is the countercultural aspect, not just for the sake of itself, but for the sake of the good and for the sake of family. I know your family is really important to you. So what was it like to go through that process of stepping away from an amount of professional success in order to invest more in what's most valuable to you, your family?
Yeah, I was trying to put my money where my mouth was, to be honest. I recognized that I was contributing to this culture, as a creator of this content, that I felt deeply convicted maybe wasn't the best for our kids and for the next generation. And so I just was curious, is there another way? If we're trying to raise creative problem solvers, if we're trying to raise discerning children and people who are curious about the world, people who exhibit critical thinking skills, why are we funneling them into this platform that we say is where they need to get their information? And so I wanted to know, is there another way? And I thought, well, I don't know, but I'm going to try. And so for me, having young kids in the home, I have 3 kids. They're 12, 8, and 4 now. And I recognized I'm going to be parenting with my phone in my hand a lot more than I want to if I stay in this job, if I stay influencing, if I stay sort of creating this content online. So how do I make this long form? How do I sort of embrace the idea that yes, I could still love writing. I can still love talking about these kinds of things, but I don't have to do it in this platform that I deeply don't agree with. And so that was kind of the kernel of interest for me. And then I just explored from there. And I found that yes, it is very possible to have a vibrant, engaging social life without social media. It's possible to have a career without social media. It's possible to do all of these things that we want our kids to experience someday without this world that we've handed them and said, hey, this is the only way to do this.
Yeah, I almost think that not only is it possible to have an engaging social life without social media, but it's a requirement.
Mm.
I wonder, I think Jonathan Haidt is the one who calls it anti-social media. We know now that there's a bidirectional relationship between social media use and loneliness. So I wonder if actually being free from those things makes us more social.
Fully agree with you, fully. And there are so many of these unspoken about benefits that when you are offline. I mean, I remember running into an editor at an airport, and she said, I can't find an author or really an editor of any sort that doesn't speak like they're on Instagram. Like it's as if we've trained these content creators to talk in short form or to speak in snippets or to use a lot of internet language in their writing. And so I can't tell you how many jobs that I've had simply because I don't speak that way and I don't write that way anymore. And how refreshing that is for a lot of people. And I think that's across all industries and across all concepts, that the more we experience life rather than talk about experiencing life, we are offering ourselves much fruit to be gained.
So now on the other side of this change, is there anything that you would tell your previous self, your pre-social media or your pre-quitting social media self, looking back? The reason I'm asking is I just wonder, the reason you had an audience in part is due to social media. So did you see that as like a necessary evil looking back, or is there something that you could have done differently?
I think I would have said that at some point, that it was a necessary evil. I think I would have said what a lot of people say, it's a tool and you can use it for good or bad. And I'm not sure I believe that anymore. I would have said do it sooner. I would have said, work on spending all of that energy that you are using on platform building, or even on making yourself fit into this social media frame of mind or sort of environment, and use it on what you believe is good for society and what you believe is good for yourself. I don't think that will ever steer you wrong if you're working from a value centric place. And so, yeah, I think there is an argument to be made that if you sort of amass your name online, can you really say that it's possible to work and live without it? And I think I did a thought experiment once, and I just wrote a list of all of my best opportunities, what I think were the things in which I was the most proud of, or the things in which I believe brought the most impact. None of those came from an Instagram comment or direct message or following or any sort of clout surrounding social media. Honestly, I would say 99% of them were from a one-to-one relationship, which I believe is so important to foster in any work, in any industry. And so the less time that we spend on social media, the more time we have to invest in people one-to-one and really get to know them and really hear their story and figure out how to add value to their life. And so I would argue that social media is a direct opposition to that. If we can spend more time on the one-to-one relationship, then all the better.
Yeah, then that is a great exercise to engage in, just reflecting on what's been most impactful. So part of this conversation is I want you to help me here. So I quit social media after college. Haven't had it for like more than 10 years. It's great. Very proud of it. Now I opened up some accounts for the sake of business, basically, to distribute these shows and other things. And so so what's my rationale? I think there's a couple here. One is I see a social media platform like LinkedIn as something it's kind of a unique social media in that it's not as addictive, although it still is. So the other consideration is I just use it very transactionally. Like, in fact, oftentimes I'm just delegating that. But then the other element is, okay, there is already such a big social media engagement. I'm not going to have much of an influence on it. But perhaps what I can do is just put good content on it. So not for the sake of having people spend more time on social media, but rather for those who are already spending time on social media, at least they'll have some more positive content that maybe in the long run will help them get off social media. So
Yeah.
that's my current way of thinking about it. I'm open to changing it and being wrong about this, but I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that.
I think that's the most, that's all we can do, is being open to being wrong about this. And I believe too that a lot of times, the way that I remember talking to, this is going to sound convoluted, but I spoke with a professional tightrope walker once, and I was interviewing her for a magazine article. And I was asking about balance, right? Is there anything about the balance of your body that translates to the balance of your life? And she said,
Great question, by the way. That's
I
awesome.
was curious. She said, it's absolutely the same thing. She said, you learn balance by falling. You learn it by, a lot of times what we do is, we try to course correct too quickly, or we try to pivot too fast, or we try to, just go all in one direction or the other. But if you're willing to be off balance for just a second longer than it feels good, if you're willing to kind of sit with it a little bit and sit with that tension and feel what that feels like, to know, oh, okay, I'm safe, I'm okay, I'm not going overboard, I just need a tiny shift in one direction. That's really huge. It's a huge life skill. And so I think right where you're at, if you're willing to kind of wrestle, I'm a very all or nothing person. And so for my personality, it's like, no, I don't want any part of this. But I would say LinkedIn feels different to me. That doesn't feel like social media because it's not algorithmic as much. It's not like, I don't believe it's out to get you to spend more time or to influence your sort of brain patterns in a different direction. I could be wrong. I haven't spent any time there, but it feels a bit less problematic than the other platforms. And I also love the idea of, hey, let me use this for good. I believe the same. I have a website, that I like to use for good. And I recognize if you're not subscribed to it, you're probably never going to see it ever, because I'm not pushing out into social. And that's okay with me. It's there if anybody, I believe that it will cross the path that it intends to cross when it does. But I think what you're on to is, is the right path, which is which small course correction am I okay making? Which thing can I move into without sort of tipping the scale? What feels good to me? And that's a great question to ask yourself.
I see the wisdom in that balance advice because I think what that guest is getting at is there's a danger of overcorrecting too quickly when you feel like you're losing your balance. And then that's what's going to, in fact, throw you overboard. So making little corrections, being reflective about growth rather than making extreme swings. Well, let me read a quote that is a part of the description of your book, Chasing Slow. So it says, I'm doing a rough paraphrase, but through a series of challenges, Erin learns just how much strength it takes to surrender it all and to veer right into grace. But what does that mean?
Well, so I think for me, one of the big aha moments of probably more my 30s than anything else, I'm in my 40s now, but when I wrote that book, it was really, I used to think that the opposite of control was chaos. And then I learned actually the opposite of control is surrender. It's surrendering the benchmark and the pace and the metric of kind of our own Western society that really seeks to measure everything and to measure progress and optimization. And is that really the way to live? Is that the way that I wanted to live? And so grace was a big part of that, making sure that yes, even if I'm not where I want to be yet, even if there's this huge divide between the person I am and the person I wish that I was, there is so much grace in the middle that I can learn to give myself and give to others, because you're seeing that this is a journey, right? And that life isn't a given, it's a gift. And so if I am to seek as if I want to be present in my life and I want to learn from my life, grace has to be part of that. And so does surrender. They go hand in hand to me.
Sorry for staying with this. I'm not sure if I understand what you mean by the word grace here. Tell me more about that.
For me, the definition of grace, I mean, I'm a believer, and so to me, it's not the idea that we are lowering the expectation of living, but we are called to a higher power. We are sort of we are offering the idea that our life is not necessarily our own, and so the gift of grace is something that was bought and something paid for, and that for us to kind of walk around and think that that means we have to tighten our grip and power through life, is that the lesson there? I don't think so. I think the lesson is I have given you this gift of life, and it's abundant, and it's freely given and freely received. And how can you move through the world with that mentality?
And okay, I gotcha. And doesn't it lead to so much more peace and joy and happiness when we can let go of the pressures we put on ourselves and just accept, as you said, that life is not given, it's a gift? That's a beautiful way of saying it. That actually, in fact, everything is a gift. Everything in existence that we experience at every moment of our lives and beyond is a gift, in fact.
I fully agree with you. I mean, I didn't make the tree that's giving me shade today. I didn't. I mean, um, everything that I feel like our soul kind of cries out to has been here before. And not at our hands. And so, yeah, I think when you kind of work from a place of there's something to be learned here, but it is a gift, and I get this present moment, and I'm not promised tomorrow. It does help you surrender the expectation of even the expectation of, am I living the right way? There are a million ways to live well, and so I think if you can kind of pay attention to how am I called to live? What do I need or want, or what does my family need or want in this world and in this life, that matters to ask those kinds of questions and to recognize that we don't always get to decide.
So let's say that you're talking to a family. Let's say you're talking to a mom and she's busy. She has young kids. She's debating whether to give her kids smartphones. She probably uses social media herself. So what are the first few things you tell her to open up her mind to a different way of seeing things?
I always start with the realization that, when you are participating in an algorithm, the next few decisions or next few minutes or next few choices really aren't your own. You're being fed something that you really truly don't know. You're on an assembly line and you're not sure where it ends. You're not really sure what the goal is on the other side. Silicon Valley's goals are never our own goals. And so I always start with kind of that recognition and that realization. And then from that place, I would just encourage her to experiment. We have a tip on our website. It's optoutfamily.com/tip. And it's just a way to make your smartphone into a dumb phone temporarily. So, there's no cost, there's no long-term commitment, but you can just hop on and you turn all the parental controls on your phone and you can figure out what is it like to move in the world without access to all of this information and stimulation and distraction at all times. What are those sticking points on my phone that I feel like I need to be able to be fully human in this world? What do I rely on? And am I okay with how much I'm relying on that? Experimenting, from that state of mind, not from a place of this has to be forever, but for me, it was important to recognize and seek those answers because that's where my kids are. That's where they're going to be. They're going to be 13, 14, 15, walking, in their friend group and without access to the internet. And they're going to be encountering these same tensions of, okay, how do I board a plane without the QR code boarding pass? How do I dine at a restaurant without the QR code? How do I do some of these small things without access to the internet? And so that's where I would start. I think every parent, every household should experiment with one parent that does not have a smartphone to kind of guide their children into this space of, is this actually necessary? Do you really feel like you need this to be a human in the world? And if so, let's talk about that. And let's talk about, what do you want from this experience? Is this going to help you get there?
That's brilliant. I like that. Okay, let's get into other frequently asked questions here. So what would you tell this mom about, well, my daughter's not going to have any friends. I mean, she's just going to be a social outcast and pariah. If I don't do this for her, I'm going to be a bad mom.
I think I would say, okay, well, if it's the friend thing, well, how hard are you willing to work, to kind of overcome that? So parenting is going to be hard either way. I think I have run into enough parents and had enough conversations with parents where you have to pick your heart. Do you want to kind of hand over your kids to with a device that is kind of maybe in direct opposition to what some of your values are, or even is changing the way that their brain works, or is exposing them to things they're not ready for? Or do you want to have the different kind of heart, which looks like having a lot of these difficult conversations about friends and relationships and tricky people and social circles and all of that? But really, the best method that I have to combat some of that, or at least proactively address some of that, is to be the low tech hangout zone. You have open door policy in your house. We do in our house. I say I am so much better at answering my door than answering my phone. So just come on in. It's open door policy. And we have teens in and out all the time.
I love that.
I mean, there's multi-generational living here. And so
that's the way to do it.
I really think it is, because, your kids are learning that there was a way to live for centuries without this technology. And gosh, the stories that our grandparents can tell us of what that life was like, and the lessons we can learn from them. That's huge. And I think I think so, multi-generational on that side, but I also think having some kids that are younger, we talk about the benefits of mixed age play all the time as a society, but I think that the younger generation then, well, now you're shaping them. You're shaping kids younger than you that are going to encounter this same tension of, well, all my friends have social media, all my friends are online, but they might not be there yet. And so you still have the power to influence them and their parents for good. You still have the power to speak into their lives and to talk about what's your experience and what it's like for you, and mentor them. And so the more that we can add these mixed age groups in, all the better. And that's what we teach it in our, we have Co-opt Out, which is just a local chapter you can sign up for or join, because it is really important that you don't do this alone. You do have to have a solid foundational support socially to be able, I believe, to do this well with your kids, so that they don't feel as if you're kind of isolating them from the rest of the world and locking them in their room without any stimulation or whatever. So those two things, multi-generational living on both ends, I think is really important.
And it's so natural. It's good for everyone. It's good for the little kids. It's good for the parents. It's good for the grandparents. And
It is.
We live in such artificial environments now where we're isolated to just the nuclear family. So if that,
Yeah.
God forbid. So, okay, well, what about another frequent one? Okay, I want them to learn how to use it when they're under my roof, so that when they go off on their own, they'll know how to handle it.
Yeah. I mean, I think, to me, having a conversation with the zookeeper, our local zoo was telling us that their chimpanzees can play with iPads. And so that blew that whole argument out of the water for me, you know. But, I get it. I understand that mentality. I think we don't do that with anything else. I don't think we do that with drugs or porn or alcohol. We're not giving them a flask at 13 and saying, let's talk about how to navigate this because you're going to have it when you're older. I don't see that argument in any other aspect of life. I do think there is a way to teach digital literacy to your kids on your own device or on a shared desktop in the home or with access to internet in a public space. I think there's a lot to be learned from, like, hey, come alongside me. I'm going to look up this recipe on our desktop in the kitchen. And I want you to notice all these pop-up ads and look at all the distractions available here. And in my preference, this is why I prefer to go to the library and borrow a cookbook. It's because I can't even, and I can't, like, my fingers are messy from like the chicken broth. And so how do I even navigate the computer, right? This is actually a lot more inconvenient than it looks. And so walking our kids and our families through different scenarios like that, I think, is really helpful. But I don't think that I don't know any kid that is given this addictive thing, which it is. The research is now out, and I'm grateful for that, because I think before we thought that it was just a personal individual problem, and now we recognize this is a public problem. And it's not just, oh, it's hard for my son, he's addicted to video games, I'm alone, I'm the only one. Now we see, well, he's addicted because they're designed that way. This isn't on him, this is on the maker of the video game. And so I think that it's kind of a flawed logic and a little bit unfair to pit our kid against the video game makers that are paid $1 billion to do their job well.
Okay, this next one's a little bit more subtle, but it's related. So I want my kids to just be normal people in the world. Like, in the world, we can't just like isolate our kids and protect them from everything. And these phones are not bad in themselves, so they just need to know how to use them well, because it's just part of our reality now.
I think for that one, a really good litmus test that I rely on a lot is, okay, let's play that out. So I would say, a normal part of childhood is having a pet, right? Having a household pet. A lot of people have them. We don't want, to be a no pet family or whatever. And our kid is interested in this thing. And so what would happen if your 11-year-old was begging you for a family dog? And you decide, okay, she's ready. Let's teach her the responsibility and teach her how to navigate it and teach her this kind of normal part of kid life and family life. Well, what happens then if, the child is growing anxious because the dog won't go down the streets and the sidewalks that they're supposed to go down, right? It keeps being unruly and sending her down different paths, right? Or what happens when her best friend can't come over because she's allergic to dogs, and so her parents say, no, you can't come over, and so now she's isolated and she's lonely. Or what happens if the dog's barking is keeping her up all night, and so she's losing sleep, and all of these things that we know that phones can do, right? And so what would you do with the dog, right? Like, what would you do with this very like small stakes situation? Would you rehome the dog, or would you sort of have a shared responsibility over the dog, or would you let the kid fend for themselves and just deal with the dog and then have it just change the course of their life, And I think that's what we have to ask ourselves as parents. We're going to answer that question differently. That's not going to be, every parent isn't going to choose the same thing. But I think if our question is, we don't want to overprotect or overstep, or we don't want to dictate too much of their childhood, and we recognize this is their future, right? We have to run these scenarios and ask ourselves, are we doing this to protect our child truly? Because we do that in a lot of parenting. We do make a lot of decisions to protect our kids. Or are we doing this because it's easier for us? Are we doing this to teach them some sort of hardship lesson about what things might look like later? Because the root is, if we say that technology is the future, we have to ask if it's the future that we want. And we have to ask that on behalf of our kids. We are the parents. We are the adult in the room. We have to ask ourselves, do we like how this is playing out for ourselves, for our kids, for their kids? Or do we have the agency and the opportunity to course correct and kind of make some changes that might work out better for them than what we had?
And all those things take reflection on the part of the parent, not to act automatically and just go along with what everyone else is doing, which is so much easier. And how can everyone be wrong? How can the vast majority of people be wrong? How can I be a bad parent if I'm just doing what the vast majority of people do? Whereas going counterculturally, okay, well, now I actually need to have some conviction. I have to be able to explain my rationale for this. And then also I have to be able to live it out in my own life with integrity rather than just saying one thing and then practicing something else my own.
It's hard. It's hard. It's hard. And I would never, I think that's one of the things that makes this a really murky conversation because it feels very judgmental. It feels, to be able to kind of stake your claim that, my kid isn't going to have a smartphone. And I will just say, my personal policy is that when my child is of age to purchase a smartphone, they can choose whatever smartphone they want, whatever phone they want for that matter, when they can handle the financial cost and the emotional cost. And I'm not going to be purchasing it for them because it doesn't align with my values. But I recognize they will be able to make that call themselves someday. And I will not want them to make that call with their eyes wide open. So I would never want for them to choose a smartphone simply because they don't know another way. I want to be the one that they can look to. I want to create this multi-generational social circle that they can point to many, many people. Uncle Fred doesn't have one, or Grandma Betsy doesn't have one, or my mom doesn't have one. My next door neighbor doesn't have one because my mom talked to her about it. Lots of things. I want them to point to lots of scenarios in which they're like, actually, do we need this? Do we? And I want them to challenge that because I think it makes all the difference in the world to be able to challenge something and ask yourself critically, is this what I want for my life? Is this what I think is this good? Is this worthy? Is this beautiful and true? And where will this lead us if extrapolated over time? Is this causing more harm than good? And, statistically, 78% of parents believe that smartphones do more harm than good. And that is mind-boggling to me that yet we're still handing them to our kids, which does not say anything to me about the parents. That says everything to me about the industry that has created the idea and this narrative that is essential to life as a modern human to carry a smartphone in your pocket. That is the bigger problem to me. It's not that we have a problem with parenting. I don't know any parent that hasn't questioned this, and the only wrong answer is to not question it at all. I think parents are good. I think they have a lot of really tricky situations. I think of co-parenting with devices. I think of a lot of really hard calls to make with it. I think of parents that for medical reasons, their child does need to be kind of on a shared device system with them at very young ages. And so I think there are always going to be scenarios. You just have to question it. You just have to ask yourself, is this what will be good for our family? And you have to be willing to be a little bit wrong.
I wish I had more neighbors like you. It sounds like you've had good success with creating the community around you. And I'm starting to think more and more that that's the next step, because the peer pressure on the part of the parents with their peers is so strong. And then, of course, that carries down through to the kids. How would you recommend fostering that community of like-minded people?
Start very young and make it very easy. We start recognizing that this was going to be the tipping point, is the social factor, right? We wanted, the subtitle of my book is How to Give Kids What Technology Can't. Technology cannot give a vibrant communication skills. It cannot give, transparency and accountability and relationship and warmth and hugs and eye contact, a lot of what makes us human. And so those are things that friend circles do provide for kids and that are very important. For me, I started with a weekly tea time. When they were really little, I just made sure my house was always open to people. And then as they got older, I asked, who do you really respect? Who do you really admire? Who do you want to invite over for weekly dinners? Who do you want to meet at the local park for, a pickup basketball game? And now it just kind of has evolved into, we just have, standing Thursday nature hikes with one family. And then we have, we still have our tea time on Wednesday mornings. So I think there are just, again, it's inconvenient. Your house is going to be messy all the time. You're going to need to really stock your fridge and make sure that the popsicles are there, but it's so worth it because your kid, at least mine, they were so busy living with friendships and with relationships and with other people. They're not seeking anything. The phone would be a distraction from that, rather than the other way around. So it's just a huge benefit. And I think that's why the multi-generational aspect is so important, because what does tend to happen is your kid will then reach that age, 12, 13, 14, where if you're doing kind of a wait until eighth group where you're all waiting until a kid reaches a certain grade at school, you're just waiting for the first kid to get the phone and then everybody follows suit, right? But if you have really looked broader and included, hey, is there a senior or a junior in the high school that doesn't have a cell phone? Why? Is there, are there some sixth graders or fifth graders that we could bring along that my kid really has fun with, whose parents aren't allowing them a device yet, and why? Well, a lot of times these types of families that are willing to buck the system flock together. Even if that's your one shared interest and you have nothing else in common. It's a start, why not get together and meet at the park every week and just bond over this one part of life that you really believe deeply about.
What you said is so good. I firmly believe that moms like you are the backbone of Western civilization. So thank you for what you do. I hope you continue to spread your
Absolutely.
mission.
Yeah.
How can people follow you, or what are some of the next steps they can take to learn more about this?
I'm not on the internet very much, surprisingly. So we do have a website, optoutfamily.com, and it's just there for resources. So if there are any questions that parents have, if they want to hear the latest research, if they want to learn more about what are some of the things a kid does need and how can they bring that into their home, go to optoutfamily.com. And if there isn't a resource there, we would love to make one for you. So just let us know, like, hey, I'm looking for this and I don't see it. We'll point you in the right direction. I mean, we're just here to help. So yeah, that would be the best spot.
And your books are?
It is out. Yeah, it's anywhere books are sold. It's called The Opt Out Family: How to Give Kids What Technology Can't.
Thank you so much, Erin.
Yeah, thanks for having me.